In the low hush of the morning, long before the world stirred, Mark Calloway, the man the world revered as the Undertaker, sat alone on the edge of his hotel bed in Geneva. The towering figure, once the mystique of every wrestling arena, now wore a plain black hoodie, his long hair tied back, and a look in his eyes that few had ever seen: doubt. He had arrived in Switzerland for what was supposed to be a light speaking engagement, a conference on global youth leadership. He was the guest of honor, a legend among generations. But things shifted when he learned who would be sharing the stage with him. Ibrahim Traoré, the transitional president of Burkina Faso. The name was unfamiliar at first. Wrestling and global politics rarely intersect. But after his manager handed him a small dossier, Mark's hands trembled as he read through it. Traoré wasn't just a leader. He was a fighter in the truest sense, a soldier turned servant, a man younger than most world leaders, but burdened with a nation's wounds. Something about that journey stirred something long dormant in Mark. That afternoon, the rehearsal went as expected. Flashes, reporters, smiles forced through stiff suits and shiny lenses. But Mark couldn't shake the image of Traoré, not from the dossier, but from a grainy online video he had watched the night before. In it, Traoré was speaking to a crowd of schoolchildren. No script, no security detail, just a gentle voice, and the kind of humility Mark had rarely seen in arenas of power. The words weren't rehearsed. They were real. They reminded him of something, of someone, maybe even himself. Later that evening, a private dinner was arranged between the two guests. Mark arrived early. The dining hall was minimalist, candlelit, with long white curtains billowing from open windows. The city lights flickered below like a pulse, and then, quietly, Traoré entered. No entourage, no loud entrance, just a man in a dark, well-worn suit, eyes soft and steady. They sat across from each other, two legends of completely different realms, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then, Mark broke the silence. "You're not what I expected," he said. Traoré smiled, modestly. "Neither are you." They both chuckled, and just like that, two men from separate galaxies of existence found themselves in the same orbit. Mark leaned back, studying the younger man. "I've slammed giants, faced crowds so loud the ground felt like it might crack. But I watched you speak yesterday, and I felt something I haven't in years." Traoré's gaze didn't waver. "What did you feel?" "Small," Mark said quietly. "In a good way." Traoré nodded. "That's how I felt the first time I saw a boy in my village stitch up his only shoe so he could walk 3 miles to school." They both paused. There was a weight in the air, not heavy, but sacred, like two men standing at the edge of something that mattered. "People think strength is what they see in the ring," Mark said, his voice graveled but sincere. "But sometimes the real fight starts after the curtain falls." Traoré's smile faded into thoughtfulness. "The ring is where the world watches, but home? That's where the world bleeds." Mark looked away, eyes misting ever so slightly. "Why does it feel like you carry more than a country on your back?" Traoré didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and slid a folded letter across the table. Mark hesitated, then opened it. It was handwritten. Childish scrawl, but its words cut like a blade through silk. "Dear President, my papa is gone. Mama cries at night. But I go to school because you said we're not forgotten. Please don't forget me. Isa, age 7. Mark read it twice, then folded it carefully.
I've gotten thousands of fan letters, he said, voice strained. None of them ever felt like this. Traore's voice barely rose above a whisper. Every morning I read one. It reminds me who I serve. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. They had shared something more sacred than conversation. Respect without borders. As they stood to leave, Mark extended a hand. Traore took it, but instead of a shake, they pulled into an embrace. You ever come to Africa? Traore said. I'll show you what the real ring looks like. I might just take you up on that, Mark replied.
But neither man could know what would come next. How one unscripted moment on stage would shake the world to its core. The auditorium was packed the next morning. World leaders, athletes, activists, students from 50 nations, all gathered in Geneva's World Civic Hall for a summit meant to inspire, to motivate. But few knew they were about to witness something far beyond inspiration, something human, something raw. Mark stood backstage in his black suit, sleeves rolled up, arms crossed, no gloves, no hat, no theatrics, just a man. His stomach turned, not from nerves, but from the heaviness that lingered in his chest. A staffer approached. Mr. Calloway, 5 minutes. He nodded. Is President Traore already out there? The staffer smiled. Not yet. He's watching from the side wing. Didn't want to steal your moment. Mark smiled faintly. He never does. The lights dimmed. The host, a charismatic media figure, walked out to booming applause. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, our next speaker needs no introduction. But today, he's not here as the Undertaker. He's here as a man who knows something about battles, inside and outside the ring. Please welcome Mark Calloway. The applause was thunderous. Mark stepped onto the stage slowly, thoughtfully. The camera lights flickered like stars. He walked to the podium, placed both hands firmly on it, and looked up at the audience. For a moment, he just breathed. Then, I've walked through fire. I've faced giants. I've built a legacy in a world where pain was entertainment. But nothing prepares you for the silence that comes after the crowd is gone. The room hushed. I used to think strength was how loud you roared, Mark continued. But I met a man last night who reminded me that strength is sometimes just sitting still when the world expects you to explode. A quiet camera pan captured Ibrahim Traore sitting in the side wing, arms folded, his face unreadable, but listening. I don't speak in metaphors much, Mark said, pacing slightly. But when you've buried enough opponents in the ring, you start to think about what really matters. And last night, I read a letter. Just 1 page, from a child. And it broke me. He paused. I'm not going to tell you what it said, because it's not mine to share. But I'll tell you what it did. It reminded me that pain isn't reserved for battlegrounds or arenas. Sometimes it hides in silence, in children, in mothers, in forgotten places. You could hear the weight of every breath in the room. I've worn masks, capes, played death. But last night I sat across from life, quiet life, dignified, steady, a man who doesn't raise his voice to be heard. Because when truth stands tall, it doesn't have to shout. At that moment, the camera cut to Traore, and for the first time you could see it, the faint shimmer in his eyes. Not pride, not embarrassment, something else, something deeper. Recognition. Mark looked up. Ibrahim, he said, softly, directly. I don't know what kind of world we're building, but if it's one where kids like Isa still write letters, Then maybe it's time we started listening to the ones who don't have microphones. The audience sat still, a silence so loud it pressed against the walls. Mark stepped back from the podium, and then, in an unscripted move, he walked to the side of the stage. The crowd watched, breathless. He extended his hand. Traore stood, but instead of shaking hands, Mark knelt. Not in worship, not in defeat, in respect. Gasps rippled through the audience. Phones lit up, cameras rolled, and around the world, people would replay that moment over and over again. A legend from a land of noise, kneeling before a man of quiet truth. Traore gently pulled him up. "I should be kneeling to you," he whispered. Mark smiled through a cracked voice. "No, you carry more than I ever have." They walked back together to center stage. And, without prompting, without script, Traore spoke. "True strength," he said, eyes scanning the room, "is when men known for thunder learn to walk in rain." Applause erupted. Not cheers, not yells, just a standing ovation, slow and sincere. Across the world, the clip spread like fire, but not just for its drama. It spread because it felt different, real, like someone had ripped away the polished shell of fame and exposed something tender, something aching beneath. It wasn't a performance, it was a mirror. That night, the two men sat across from each other again. Not in a studio, not on a stage, but in a modest cafe at the edge of the city. No press, no handlers, just 2 mugs of tea and the sound of distant traffic humming like an old lullaby. "You ever miss the roar?" Traore asked gently. Mark looked up, the streetlights glinting faintly off the side of his face. "Every day," he said, "but not the noise, the clarity it gave. When the crowd roared, it meant I mattered. At least, that's what I thought." Traore nodded slowly, stirring his tea. "And now?" he asked. Mark chuckled, low and dry. "Now I wonder if I ever really mattered, or just performed the idea of mattering." Traore set his spoon down. "You mattered," he said, "but not for the reasons they wrote about. You mattered because people saw pain dressed in power. They just didn't know how close the two were." Mark exhaled through his nose. "And you, how do you carry it all? The weight, the expectations, the quiet judgment." Traore leaned back. "I stopped carrying it." Mark raised a brow. "I became it," Traore clarified. "You can't carry what you are." They sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that doesn't demand words, only presence. After a moment, Mark pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "I want to show you something." He slid it across the table. Traore unfolded it slowly, a letter, handwritten, shaky, smudged at the corners. It read, "Dear Undertaker, my name is Emmanuel. I don't know if you read letters from people like me, but I saw your video with the president. I've been bullied for years. I'm 14. I love wrestling. But I love quiet things too, like painting. And that made the other boys laugh at me. When you knelt, I cried. You made it okay to be soft. I just wanted to say thank you. I feel less alone now. Emmanuel. Traore read it twice, then folded it gently and handed it back. I hope you wrote him back, he said. Mark nodded. I did, but I didn't know how to say what I felt, so I told him the truth. What's that? That sometimes the scariest men in the world are just boys who were never allowed to cry. Traore smiled faintly, then looked away, eyes wet. We all were. They clinked their mugs together and drank in silence. By morning, Emmanuel's letter had been posted on a small message board. No one expected it to go viral, but it did. Not because of Mark's fame or Traore's presence, but because the words were so painfully honest. Within hours, dozens of kids, boys and girls, began sharing their own versions. One wrote, I thought I had to be loud to be heard. Another, I'm 17. My dad left. But that video made me feel like someone stayed. And the one that shook the world. Dear Mr. President and Mr. Wrestler, I was going to disappear today, but after watching you two, I won't. I think I'm going to try again. News anchors read the letters on air. Talk shows opened with silence, not applause, silence. Teachers played the clip in classrooms, not for politics, but for character. Mark Calloway, once a figure of theatrical death, was now the face of emotional survival. President Ibrahim Traore, once obscure in the West, had become a compass, pointing to what humanity could still be. But behind it all, neither of them chased credit. One afternoon, a call came through to Mark's hotel suite. He picked up, expecting a coordinator or journalist. Instead, a trembling voice. Sir, my son, Emmanuel, he wants to meet you. Mark's eyes filled instantly. Where are you? Ghana, a village 2 hours out of Accra. It's not much. I'll come, Mark said without hesitation. 2 days later, a dusty black SUV pulled into a red dirt road lined with mango trees and crooked power lines. A small group waited at the gate. Among them, Emmanuel, his eyes wide, lips trembling. Mark stepped out, towering but gentle. He walked up to the boy slowly, then bent down on one knee. I got your letter, he said softly. Emmanuel didn't speak. He just wrapped his arms around Mark's neck and sobbed. For the first time in a long time, Mark let himself cry too. There were no cameras, no statements, just healing. Traore arrived later that evening. They sat around a small outdoor fire with Emmanuel and his mother. The boy showed them his paintings, small watercolors of trees, faces, and a quiet moment of a tall man kneeling before a shorter one. Traore pointed to that one. That, he said, is not a portrait. It's a revolution. In the months that followed, something unusual began to stir. Small community centers across West Africa began hosting silence circles, inspired by Traore's quiet dignity and Mark's emotional vulnerability. No slogans, no campaigns, just spaces where young people could speak or sit in silence and be heard. In Tennessee, Mark funded the first Room of Calm inside a public school, a space for overwhelmed students to just sit, breathe, and not be graded. Emmanuel's painting became the symbol for the movement. And on one ordinary evening, during a gathering in Ouagadougou, Mark Calloway stood beside Traoré once more. No script, no speech. He simply held up Emmanuel's painting and said, "We changed the world, one honest moment at a time." A year had passed. The world had moved on, as it always does. Headlines faded. New controversies swept through the media, but something small and powerful remained. A seed planted in silence. In a quiet room at a school in Mali, a boy named Yusuf sat beside a counselor. He was only 10. He hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks after losing his father. But today, he clutched a small photo in his hands, a printed screenshot of the Undertaker and Traoré, arms around Emmanuel, smiling under the Ghanaian sun. "I want to be like them," he whispered. The counselor blinked. "Strong?" she asked. "No," he replied, shaking his head slowly. "Safe." That word, safe, echoed across continents. In Texas, Mark Calloway stood in his garage, where he'd quietly transformed the space into a small art therapy room for kids who didn't fit the mold. On the wall was Emmanuel's original painting, framed under soft lights. He looked at it every morning before he began his day. "I became famous wearing black," he once told a class of visiting students. "But I became a man learning how to show color." At the same time, in Burkina Faso, Traoré walked through a new youth center built from donations sparked by the viral clip. But no plaque bore his name. When asked why, he smiled. "Because the best leaders leave footprints, not signatures." In the courtyard of that center, dozens of children painted quietly. No one was rushing, no one was performing. Just expression, just peace. Traoré sat on a bench and pulled out a letter from his pocket. It was worn at the corners. "Dear Mr. President, I don't know where you come from, but I feel like you came for me. When I saw you not react with anger, I learned I don't have to either. I hope one day I can speak without shouting and still be heard. Thank you for showing me that real power doesn't need volume. Your quiet voice saved my loud heart." It was signed by a girl in Brooklyn, 11 years old. Traoré folded it slowly and closed his eyes. One final scene, a year and a half later. A surprise guest is announced at an annual youth summit in Geneva. Mark Calloway steps onto the stage. Not in costume, not in a suit, just himself. Behind him, President Traoré follows. The room of world leaders, students, activists falls silent. Mark looks at the sea of expectant faces. "I'm not a politician. I'm not even a speaker. I'm just a man who used to think silence was weakness, until it saved me." He points to Traoré. He didn't clap back. He didn't posture. He looked me in the eye and reminded me who I was underneath all the noise. He pauses, and I think we're all carrying noise. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop. He looks directly at the camera, as if speaking to the next Emmanuel, the next Yusuf, the next unknown boy or girl watching from some quiet corner of the world. I wore black and walked through smoke for most of my life. But now I know, peace doesn't need an entrance. It just needs a chance. Then he steps aside. Traoré steps forward, calm as ever. He speaks only once. "If you want to change the world, start by listening to the parts of yourself you've silenced." The room erupts, not with noise, but with standing silence. Tears, unity, stillness, louder than applause. A young girl in a refugee camp draws a picture. A boy in Scotland paints his emotions for the first time. A teacher in Brazil changes the class assignment from write an argument to write something true. In Ghana, Emmanuel is now 15. He walks into a small art school named in his honor. The first thing he sees is a wall-sized version of his painting. He smiles, touches the brush, and begins again.